Hello and welcome back to Citizen Speak. I'm your host, Garrett Martin. Thank you so much for listening today. So, on Saturday, we just had the last debate of the year. It was the Democratic debate hosted by ABC on quite possibly the worst day that you could pick for a debate on Super Saturday, the last Saturday before Christmas, where many people are out shopping or they're just out in general, just enjoying time with family before the big holiday comes. Or just taking a breather by themselves before they have to be around a bunch of family. I'm sure many of you know that. So what I want to do for this episode is I just want to talk about the candidates on both sides because we only have a few weeks up until the primaries and caucuses happen. And I want to talk about both the Republican side and the Democratic side. So let's just hop into it. All right, so the poll numbers I'm going to give you are the averages across all of the major polls. And first person on the Republican side that we're going to talk about is, well, you probably guessed it, Donald Trump. He's leading the field at 34.4%, of course, in first place. Donald Trump, he's really tapped into what the Republican base wants to hear. It's what the conservative media outlets have been saying for many of years now, that we have to hate certain groups, or that certain groups are responsible for all the crime, or that certain groups are just terrorists. And Donald Trump, he goes, yep, this is what conservative media says. They're super popular. So if I go out there, I say these things, I'll be popular too. And guess what? It's paid off for him very well. Not that it's good that he's saying these things, but he's tapped into what the Republican base wants to hear. He wants to hear that the world should be afraid of Muslims. The American people on the Republican side, they want to hear that, oh, well, our problems would be better if we didn't have nearly as many Mexicans in this country, or we have too many blacks killing people in this country. He's basically just being the ignorant candidate that the Republican voters say, all right, yeah, we'll back him. He's going to make America great by doing these things that he says that he's gonna do, and he just hates the people, but we don't exactly know what he's gonna do. But that doesn't matter because he's a Republican, I'm a Republican, he hates the same people that I hate, so I'm gonna back Trump. And that's a Republican base. That's why his poll numbers are at 34.4% on average across all the polls, and that's why he's leading the field. And there's many people who say that, oh, well, Trump's gonna drop out, don't worry about Trump. Why on earth would somebody who's been leading the polls since almost the first day that he announced his candidacy, why on earth would he drop out? Oh, might it be because he is going to run out of money? No. He hasn't taken a whole lot of money from other people. He has taken money. He's not 100% funded like he's claimed in the past, all by himself. He has taken money, but all he has to do is just go, hey, everybody, I'm open for taking big donations from super PACs or from the very rich because I'm going to win this. And, if you want to show me some support, throw some money my way. And the donations will pour in for Donald Trump. There's no question about it. All he has to do is just say, all right, open the floodgate, boys, and people will come running with money for him. The next person to talk about is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, I don't get it. He's in second place at 17%, 17.15% of the Republican base is rooting for old Ted Cruz. He is a weak candidate, to be honest. He's basically been riding the coattails of Donald Trump this entire time. He's saying only enough to get him by, but not enough to really make him big in headlines or anything like that. The same week that Trump said that we need to ban all Muslims from coming into the country, Cruz introduced 3 bills that would limit, and ultimately it would stop refugees from countries controlled by terrorism from entering in the United States. Basically Muslims, he's going to stop from entering in the country. But the records over there are so poor, and there's other countries that have poor records. This would be an easy loophole to get around. But anyway, Cruz, the only other reason why he's in second place right now is because he's pandering, and he's always done this. This is the only way that he actually gets elected, is he panders to people and he says, oh, well, Christians are being attacked here in America. They're being attacked around the world. They're being persecuted here in America. Their rights are in question and ever dwindling here in America. And I'm here to put an end to that, and I'm really going to change it. And he rubs his hands together and he roots for states like Indiana when they pass the religious liberty bills that he's tried to introduce as well on a national level. But he roots for these states who do this, and he goes, all right, well, now these Christians in these states can really live their values. No one's saying that a Christian can't live their values, Cruz. What people are saying is you just can't deny rights to somebody because your sky god says that you have the ability or you have the authority to deny rights to somebody else who doesn't believe in your sky god, or who maybe does believe in your God, but just not the same way that you believe in your God. But that's how Cruz has won his election so far, just pandering towards this group of people. And that's why he's in second place in the GOP field, is because he panders towards this group. He doesn't really say anything that the other candidates aren't saying. He doesn't say things better than the other candidates. He panders towards a very specific group, which is strong in the Republican base, and he follows Donald Trump's coattails almost to the T. He's just softer about it than Donald Trump is. Make no mistake, he's not that different than Donald Trump. All right, so then let's go to third place with Marco Rubio, who's at 12.3% on average across the polls. Rubio is just like Ted Cruz. He's a softer version of Ted Cruz, but he's a younger version of Ted Cruz. However, Rubio isn't as tested as Ted Cruz is. He doesn't have as strong of a track record as Cruz does. Rubio has a huge thing going against him, and that's he's missing his votes in the House. He's not there for these votes. Like the omnibus bill, he missed the vote for that because he was off campaigning. And it's kind of a good indicator of, is this president going to care about you, or is he going to care about the job that he's elected to do, or is he going to care about himself and go out there and get more money for himself or go take more vacations for himself? It kind of points that he would be a lot more like President George W. Bush, who would go off on more vacations and be more selfish about his presidency. That's the kind of president that you get with Rubio. He's very flaky at best. But that's one thing that his competitors have attacked him on, and it's worked well for his competitors. Rubio misses votes, important votes at that. And it's just, he's okay as a candidate. I mean, not as a general election candidate, but as a Republican candidate, he's all right. You know, give him another 10 years or 15 years, he might make a decent Republican candidate. But as it stands right now, he's in third place just because he's following the lead of Ted Cruz, which is following the lead of Donald Trump. It's like the Russian nesting dolls. You have the big crazy Donald Trump, and then you open up Donald Trump, and out pops a slightly smaller crazy Ted Cruz, and out pops from Ted Cruz slightly less crazy Marco Rubio. And that's what you get in your top three there. You get the nesting dolls. Now, I'm not going to talk about number 4, which is Ben Carson. He's not doing anything, man. He's not coming back in the polls. He's not going to rise back up. He has sung his song, and he is out to pasture. He's not coming back. He is in 4th place. I'll give you that. But what I want to talk about is Jeb Bush, who's number 5. He's at 4.6% on average across all the polls. And the reason why I want to talk about Jeb Bush and not Ben Carson is Jeb has really hung in there. You had a huge spat between Donald Trump and Jeb Bush. Trump basically broke Jeb Bush and knocked him way down in the polls. And that's what led to the rise of Ben Carson and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, is the dispute and the fight between Trump and Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush was number one in the field until Trump came in, and then Jeb Bush goes, "Oh well, I'm gonna knock Trump down." Excuse me. And as a result, it backfired, and Jeb went down hard. But he stayed in there, and shortly after he had that dispute, and Trump took him in the polls and broke him down. Jeb, he had that horrible soundbite where he was asked, what's going to be different? People don't say that you're really a fighter. And Jeb Bush says, well, people who say that I'm not a fighter, they don't know me that well. Because I wake up and I eat nails for breakfast. And then I eat breakfast. Come on, Jeb. You couldn't have thought of a better line than that? You couldn't have remembered the Rocky line that you were reaching for? Come on. But then, after Trump had broke him and he said this horrible line, he started to have a lot of campaign supporters, a lot of people giving him money, kind of dry up and stop giving him so much money. It just wasn't out there for him at this time. And as a result, he had to greatly reduce his staff. And in spite of that, Jeb Bush has really pushed forward. He's really hung on. He's stayed somewhat strong. At one point, he was under Bobby Jindal, but even in spite of that, he stayed in the race. He stayed strong, and he's coming back a little bit. Not really great, but he's coming back. But one thing that Jeb Bush has going for him is, in the polls, you have Donald Trump, who is leading the Republican base, and it shows very favorably towards Trump. But I don't know. I don't think a lot of those people who are calling in for these polls, who are answering these calls, I don't think that they're actually going to come out and vote. I think that the people who you're going to see are more traditional Republicans, people who are registered for the primaries and the caucuses every year. Every time they're out there and they're voting every single primary that comes up. I think those are the type of people who are going to come out, not the people who are like, oh yeah, I support Trump and I'm going to be all for him on the polls. But when it comes voting day, I don't think a lot of the Trump supporters are actually going to be out there voting for Trump as much as they are candidates who are more traditional, like Jeb Bush. And if Jeb Bush in the next couple of weeks really wants to make a comeback, it's what I've been saying this entire time that I've been doing this podcast when I talk about Jeb Bush. He needs to get George out there on the news media outlets talking up his brother. George W. Bush still polls very favorably amongst Republican base. And if Jeb wishes to gain more support in the race, he needs to bring out his brother, his George W. Bush brother. And he needs to embrace that instead of shy away from it. And I think with only a couple weeks left, I think now would be a really great time. Or, maybe after the first of the year, try to get some quick, easy votes in there, try to take back some of the field. If Jeb does that, he might stand a really strong chance. All right, let's drop the Republicans. Let's move on to the Democrats. We have Hillary Clinton, who we have to start with. She's in first place at 56.3% of the average across all the polls. Hillary Clinton leads the polls at 56.3%. Now, Hillary's been a favorite amongst the media and in general in the polls. However, she panders to every crowd, and that's why she's rising so high in the polls. Candidates need to pander to their voters. They need to go out there and say what their voters want to hear, so that way they can get the vote or they can get the donations. But it seems very superficial. It doesn't feel organic. I mean, even if you look at how Hillary Clinton had become a senator in the past, she moved to a district in New York where she had a strong favorability, and she lived there for the time frame that she needed to before she could run, and then she ran and won it very easily. She didn't go back to her home state where she was born at. She didn't try to run in any state that she wasn't favorable in. She took the very easy route to gain her political background. And I know that she's done other things in the past, but if we're just looking at her since Bill Clinton has left office, it's just very superficial as a feeling like. Now, she draws really big money from big banks and Wall Street, and if you follow the money and who she's getting money from, that's who she's going to support. That's who she's going to be in favor of. That's whose policies she's going to want passed more, are policies that will favor Wall Street and big banks. Because if she doesn't, she won't have the money to run for the next presidency. I mean, it's with every candidate. You follow who's giving them money, you know the way that they're going to vote. Now, the really remarkable thing is Hillary Clinton's been hammered by the Republican media and the Republican candidates on things like Benghazi or the email scandal that she had. But throughout all of that, she continues to rise in the poll. It's like she has Teflon on her or something like that, where nothing really sticks to her and she just keeps rising up in the polls. But if you look at the poll numbers alone, you'd think that she would hands down be the Democratic nominee after all the caucuses and primaries are done with. You'd expect Hillary Clinton to win. Well, here comes Bernie Sanders in second place at 30.6%. Bernie Sanders has received very little airtime compared to the other candidates on both sides of the aisle. If you look at even CNN, there was a statistic a couple weeks back I had saw where they did 85 minutes of Donald Trump and 1 minute of Bernie Sanders. I mean, if you're talking about wanting a fair shake as far as candidates go, Bernie Sanders definitely hasn't gotten a fair shake as far as media time is concerned, especially for somebody who's doing really well as far as campaign contributions go. He has the most campaign contributions of any candidate in all of history here in America. But as far as being number 2 in the polls and receiving the most campaign contributions out of any candidate in history, he continues to get the least amount of airtime. If you have a candidate who is kind of a rock star in this fashion, you'd expect him to have more airtime, but he doesn't. He really doesn't. So, Sanders, he's a decent candidate, to be honest. He's the only candidate who says that the rich won't like him and that their tax loopholes need to be closed and that the rich need to pay their fair share. No other candidate's out there saying that. No other candidate is talking about equal rights the way that Bernie Sanders does. No other candidate is talking about health care the way that Bernie Sanders does. No other candidate is talking about college the way that Bernie Sanders does. And yet he still receives the least amount of airtime. But if you look at his crowds, he has really big crowds in almost everywhere that he goes. Now, some people will go back and go, oh, well, what about the Black Lives Matter protesters who shut his campaign down? They're not shutting down, let's say, Donald Trump. They're not shutting down Donald Trump's campaign. Oh, that's right, because someone like Donald Trump will have protesters beaten up and thrown out of the arena. But if you remember, if you go back and you watch the Black Lives Matter protesters who shut down Bernie Sanders' campaign, well, a couple months later, you actually will see them up on stage endorsing Donald Trump. And actually, these two women who shut down the Bernie Sanders rally one day, they were supporters of Sarah Palin as well. They're paid to be there by Donald Trump or by a super PAC to shut down a Bernie Sanders rally. And that's why they were there. But there's a lot of Black Lives Matter supporters who support Bernie Sanders. These two women were paid to be there. But anyway, let's keep talking about his campaign. He has a huge social media outreach. In many of the polls that come out after debates, who won the debate on social media, many of them always point towards Bernie Sanders winning. Yet when you have the major media like MSNBC or CNN report these polls, they either delete the polls or they just don't talk about them, and they leave them up and they just go, "Oh no, don't worry about that. That was just some crazy kids online. Don't worry about that." Well, that's the other thing. Bernie Sanders has a huge support in the youth vote, which is really great because we need more young people to vote, no matter who you support, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats. We should be encouraging the youth to vote, not saying, "Oh, well, you're too young, you don't know what you're talking about." Spend some time with somebody. Go talk to somebody about voting or elections in general, and try to talk to them on a way that they'll understand it, and encourage them to be part of this, and not just shoo them away. Encourage people to actually want to go and vote. And I think that's one thing that Bernie Sanders has been doing, is he's encouraging young people to go out and vote. The only thing that's really against Bernie Sanders on his campaign is this tarnish that he has, where one of his staffers may have downloaded some Hillary Clinton voter data. And the staffer has been fired since, but he apologized in the debate, even though it was kind of a half-hearted apology. Hillary Clinton, she accepted the apology, and it kind of just is swept under the rug now. Bernie Sanders, his campaign, they have the records back. They can access the records again on the DNC website. They were restricted for like 12 hours or so, and we thought that it might have been going on longer. Bernie Sanders' campaign is actually suing the DNC now for holding these records from the Sanders campaign, and just kind of jumping the gun on it. But, you know, that's the one thing that's really hurting Bernie Sanders, or could potentially hurt him, is this little debacle. And it's not really that bad, but I can see how some voters may lose trust in Bernie Sanders. Martin O'Malley. Oh, Martin O'Malley. He's in third place, last place in the Democratic field. He's at 4.3% of the vote with the Democrats. O'Malley, he's run a fair campaign. He doesn't really speak to anybody the way that Sanders or Clinton, the way that they speak to people. He's just kind of a lame candidate. He'd make a great Democrat in, let's say, the 90s or even earlier than that. But in this day and age, he's just not really much to look at, or he's not really someone to get behind too much. He'd make a weak Republican candidate in the field, just like Jim Webb, but there's just not much to talk about with old Martin O'Malley, and it sucks. I mean, he seems like a nice guy. He seems like a decent guy, but he's just kind of a wet dish towel as far as candidates go. So that's kind of my breakdown here. What you want to look at upcoming in the polls is the candidates around this time. There's a lot of fluctuation that goes on. There's a lot more money that's being pumped into ads, but also there's a lot more stress on the candidates, and they're more likely to slip up and say something or do something very idiotic at this point in the race. So what you want to look at is maybe a scandal coming out against Trump, or against Cruz or Rubio, or even Clinton or Sanders. I mean, Sanders just had the data breach. We just talked about that. So that's kind of his little flub there. But there's still something for Clinton out there at this point in the race. There could still be something out there for Trump or Cruz or Rubio. So those are something to look for, and you'll really see a great fluctuation in the polls at this point. Let me know in the comments on Twitter @SitSpeak. That's @CITZSpeak. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know if you think I'm off my rocker, or if I'm dead on, or just want to stop by and say hi. Find me on Twitter @CITZSpeak. That's @CitizenSpeak. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great rest of the day.